Let's open a word of prayer. Lord, thank you so much for this day. We pray that you will bless our time together. And as we try to discuss coherently some of the things that are going on in the world that are related to Bible prophecy, in Jesus' name, amen. Well, I was kind of busy this week. I have not slept much for the last few nights. So if this sounds a little bit like I just went 3 rounds with a good boxer, you'll understand. So we're going to talk about moving in many directions. And I've got a, excuse me one second. I have a video I wanted to add in, and I need to add it in before I forget about it, because I forgot about it already. Now I have to try to figure out where this goes. Okay. It's actually not a video, it's just audio. So. But it's in a video form. But you don't need to know all that. Okay, so moving in many directions. And I got that line, the reason I thought of it was because I got that line from an interview I'll play just a very short clip of with between Dan Senor, who's, I think he worked in national security and one of the in the Trump administration. He's Jewish. He has a podcast which I really like. It's called Call Me Back. That's how he schedules things. He says, "I hope they call me back," and it's very good. But he draws from a broad spectrum, across the broad political spectrum of people, mainly related to Israel. So he has an interview this week, or was put up this week, with Walter Russell Mead. Walter Russell Mead is a geopolitical diplomatic expert. He teaches at Yale University. Now, he was a protege of Henry Kissinger, so he's tied into all the Council on Foreign Relations types. But he's a smart guy. He does have a particular interest in the Middle East, and he wrote a book called The Art of the Covenant about Israel. And I think there's, again, these things that we talk about, the world, particularly in the Middle East, there are a lot of competing interests. And we want to try to break things down into categories, like, okay, this is Hamas's position, and it fits with Iran's position, and it fits with Qatar's position, and that's not true. That everybody has their own interest, and sometimes they overlap, and a lot of times they don't. So a lot of people would like to see Israel and the United States unified. It's never going to happen, particularly with the crew that we have in there right now. So geopolitics gets very, very complicated. And then you layer on top of that, when we talk about Bible prophecy and we have these parameters that are laid out about how things are going to be fitting together, but it's not super, super specific. What I know people would like it to be, and again, I keep saying I'm less dogmatic now than I ever was about exactly how it's going to work out. I think we need to be very careful about planting our flags too quickly about this is the actual fulfillment of Bible prophecy. So you'll see that sometimes with the Valley of Dry Bones prophecy in Ezekiel chapter 37. People say, oh, that's been fulfilled because Israel's come back as the nation. But read the whole chapter and read what is the result of this gathering of the dry bones. And there's a very heavy spiritual component to it. It's just not a geopolitical entity that comes about. So I think sometimes we're a little bit too quick to say this is that which was prophesied. There will be a time for that, and that'll be difficult to navigate, especially as we move forward, if we're at the point where I think we are. So this is my little graphic that I'm working on. As you can see, it's been the same for 2 months now, which means I haven't got back to it about the sort of the chessboard and how things are moving around. And you're going to see an example of that when I talk about Hezbollah and Israel and how that's going. So these are the sort of the parameters that I use. And all this is based on Scripture. So I don't go through the scriptures every week. I just assume that you're going to know some of these. But acceleration, and that's partly based on the pattern of fulfillment of Bible prophecy, that what happened at the first coming of Jesus will be what's going on in the world, the second coming of Jesus. And at the first coming of Jesus, there were a bunch of prophecies that were fulfilled. Sometimes they were a little bit surprising, like Matthew, behold, a virgin shall conceive. And I've often wondered, like, if people really believed that prophecy, were they running around checking for pregnant virgins in Judea around the time of Jesus that would be from the line of David? And the answer is probably not. But Matthew came in and said, well, but this is that which was prophesied. But then we also learned that in the last week that Jesus was here before the Passion Week, I guess he was around for 40 days after that, but about 60% of all the prophecies related to his first coming took place in that last week. And what you find is Jewish thought and about prophecy is pattern. So we see the pattern there. A lot of things happen right at the end. This is what's going to happen. You're going to see a lot of things happen right at the end. And so what we see is we see a lot of things being put in place so a lot of things could happen very, very quickly. There'll be a convergence. There'll be a lot of things going on at the same time. Logistics. This is one. I don't think I have time to get into it today, but one of the ones where there's sort of a bit of argument in Bible prophecy circles is, what's this final Babylon? Where is it? What is it? And so you get the United States people, you get the people who say it's Jerusalem, you get some who say it's Neom or Mecca in Saudi Arabia, and then you get others to say it's Babylon. It's Babylon, but it's also called Mystery Babylon, a mystery. So maybe, I don't know what the mystery relates to. The mystery could be, boy, how did Babylon come back into prominence? That's a mystery. That might be a mystery. Or the mystery will be, maybe it's not where you think it is, and maybe it's a little bit broader than what you think it is. So, and we'll see how that works out. And I have a whole bunch of articles and things that I've been reading, like, well, they're building a port in Basra in Iraq. Well, that's about 300 miles south of where Babylon really is. And see, there's Babylon coming back. Well, they're not building anything in Babylon, though. Now, they did build some things. They did put some infrastructure in there. And they're talking about spending a couple $2 billion to build apartments and housing in that general area. But that's not, I think if it's going to be the greatest commercial city on the planet, there's a logistical aspect. You got to get it built. If you think of Dubai and United Arab Emirates, that took over 30 years to build. So the old saying is, Rome wasn't built in a day, and Babylon won't be built in a day either. And then everybody says, well, but look, they can build, okay, let's keep watching it and we'll see what happens. And then understanding, and that's based on the verse in Daniel, it talks about the fact when we get closer, we'll have a better understanding. The example I use is when I go to my eye doctor, he used to put up the same chart. And you could memorize it and fool them. Not that I would do that, but now they mix it up. But they always start with the E, and I can see the E. I'm very nearsighted. But then, as you go down, I can't see it because I'm nearsighted. But even if I took my glasses off and got closer to the object, I would have a clear picture of it. That's how Bible prophecy, I think, is going to work out. So, and I won't talk about these this week. I've got a couple stray things that I want to clear up. I'll talk about this a little bit if I have time at the end about AI development and that type of thing. This is from 2 weeks ago. And what do you see here? You see NVIDIA. This stock has gone crazy. I mean, if you bought, I don't know, $10,000 of NVIDIA 10 years ago, you're retiring someplace and flying there on your private jet because you would have that much money. And 2 weeks ago, when I pulled this graphic out of the Financial Times, NVIDIA's total company capitalization was $2.7 trillion. It's now over $3 trillion. That's just in 2 weeks. And things are very, very volatile in the world. Hang on a second here. Another thing that you need to keep track of is the digital identity. Europe and other places are putting, I think Australia has put into place digital identity, and they always say, it's voluntary. We're not going to track you. If you want to opt out, you can opt out. And that's all well and good now, but is it going to stay that way? And I just don't see how that it's going to stay this way. And I was just talking to someone about demographics. I think this is something a lot of Bible prophecy guys overlook. We have a major problem in the world because people are not having kids. China's population is going down. Japan, which is now, I think, back into a financial crisis, they've lost, I think last year their population in Japan went down 1 million people. So that, imagine like half of the people in Columbus are gone in 1 year. That's shocking. China could be less than half of what it is. You look at some of the statistics, there's a great website, it's some kind of biometric site that tracks all the population statistics, and you can see European, American, all these, the population it's like on the downward spiral, it's on the downward slope of a very steep roller coaster. And I don't think we've figured out exactly how that's going to change things geopolitically. I personally think that it plays into Bible prophecy. This is Pride Month. Where is my, excuse me. This is Pride Month. So this is kind of good news in the UK. First on the right, AI. AI can't replicate legal reasoning. Now, I think the headline is misleading. It's that AI cannot necessarily replicate good legal reasoning. It's very easy to replicate bad legal reasoning. I was a lawyer. I read a lot of briefs. I wrote a lot of briefs in my day, and sometimes people would make really ridiculous arguments. And I probably shouldn't go into that. I don't think it's covered by attorney-client privilege anymore, but it's irrelevant. The other thing, the good news on the side, though, is they have all these cases for getting kids these drugs and surgeries that mutilate them, either hormonally or physically. They're terrible. I mean, go read about what they do in these surgeries. And what they're finding in the UK is when these cases come to court now, nobody wants to come in and be an expert witness to support mutilating the kid. Now, I think this is a good thing. This is sort of how social pressure brings about good things. In the UK, they're having a big election this year, and I may or may not have more about that later. The Tories are going to get wiped out by all reasonable measures. But Labor, which is going to rise up to the top maybe and take control of the parliament and the prime ministership, they want to cut the voting age to 16. To which I would say is, well, why not 12? I mean, really, if you're going to, and I'm just not sure a 16-year-old is ready to do that. And this is China. Again, China is doing all kinds of things to monitor people and take control. So let me move on here to I have a lot of stuff that I haven't covered. Oh, there it is. Okay. So let's so we have this thing that the one thing that you can kind of get out of all these stories in Bible prophecy this week is that the world is really turning on Israel. Now, there was very good news out of Israel yesterday. I'll talk about that. But the International Criminal Court is moving ahead. The International Court of Justice, they're all moving ahead to advance things against Israel. The International Criminal Court is still threatening, I don't think they've issued them yet, to issue arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant. And then they've actually come out and said, and if you do anything to support them, we'll come after you too. Because that in the United States, I think Tom Cotton or somebody introduced something in the Senate to say, hey, we don't want you to do this. We think this is wrong, and we're not going to fund you. And the International Criminal Court people were saying, then we're coming after you too. They don't want you to travel, and you can't travel internationally. It's just like since former President Trump was convicted, there's like 47 countries that he can't go into now as a convicted felon. And that's unusual. I mean, what happens if he wants to go to some of these countries if he gets reelected president? I don't know if he will. I don't know how this is going to go. I'm not a predictor. The other thing you see is you see Tony Blinken, Amos Hochstein, and others running around all over the place to try to work out some kind of peace agreements. Peace, peace, peace. This is all that they're about. And they're willing to sacrifice Israel and common sense and everything. So I'm going to talk more about this in just a little bit. One of the guys in the UK election has said he will support, they release these manifestos or platforms, he'll support recognition of a Palestinian state. This is by my... this is what all the people and leadership in the world want to do, that this is going to solve the problem. And it's insanity. This has never worked. It's not going to work, but it may be tried. It may be tried, and I think we just have to see how this is going to play out. There are many different proposals out there. I think the most significant one is going to come from the Saudis, particularly if they want to normalize things with Israel. But I also, the Arab League is saying Palestinian state based on the 1967 lines. That's just absolute craziness. Israel's never going to accept that unless it's somehow shoved down their throats, which really could be how that works out. But so here's one of the guys leading in the polls to take over in the UK, and he's saying we're going to recognize a Palestinian state. Spain has already come out and done it. That's kind of an interesting story. Spain came out and said, we will recognize a state of Palestine. So what did Spain do then? Well, usually when you have, you recognize a state, you establish an embassy within that state. So they started sending their diplomats up to Ramallah, which is where the Palestinians have their capital. And guess what happened? The diplomats that they went up there said, we don't want to live here. We want to live in Israel. But I thought you were all for a Palestinian state. Well, yeah, for them, it's just, what's the old saying? It would be hard to make this stuff up. There was this week, there were a lot of back and forth in the Israel border. And this will be kind of a recurring thing because we're going to talk a little bit more about it later. But Hezbollah launched missiles, drones, and that type of thing. And the problem that they've had here recently is that some of them are getting through. One of them apparently got through and damaged an Iron Dome launcher up near the Lebanon border. This is pretty significant. I don't think this has happened before. And the concern is, are they jamming the system? Have they hacked into the system and they're running blind? And I mean, Israel's used this for years, probably more effectively than any country on the planet. If you remember back in 2007, the Syrians up in the area, by the way, the area that was later taken over by ISIS, were building a nuclear reactor. Just imagine if that reactor got finished and ISIS came along and ISIS took over the nuclear reactor. I think we would have some problems in the world. And it was based on its exact copy of a North Korean design. So Israel said, we got to take it out. In fact, I think we just had the anniversary of when they bombed the Iraqi nuclear reactor. They sent planes over there, but in this case, they sent planes up along the coast of Syria, into southern Turkey, across Turkey, down into Syria, bombed the thing, destroyed it, and flew back, and they never had a shot fired at them. Now, that was 2007. Their sophistication in jamming radar and that type of thing has grown tremendously. They had a plane back in those days. I think they have a number of iterations of it now. It's built by Grumman in Long Beach, California, and they put jamming equipment in that, and they could essentially go up, fly that plane up, and they could jam and blind every radar system that would be thrown at them or that would be used to launch missiles at their aircraft. Now the concern, though, is with the development of technology that your enemies get a hold of that type of stuff. And now you have a problem. And so this week there was an attack in the north. And I think in one of these attacks, I don't remember if it was this one or another one, a couple of Israeli soldiers, military personnel lost their lives. So it's a big problem. Now, the UN, this is from Israel Hayom. The UN came out and said this week, Israel, you're really bad. You're killing children. We're putting you on a bad country list or a bad entity list, like we did with ISIS and other terror, and like we did with Hamas. Israel, you're the same as these other people. The interesting part of how this occurs at the UN, or when it occurs at the UN has no problem living in cognitive dissonance. They can hold two completely contrary positions at the same time, and it doesn't bother them. I think it's a postmodern phenomenon. So they get on Israel for killing children and being brutal in the way they act. And I'll spare you the video, but they did last week a 90-minute memorial tribute to the now dead Iranian President Raisi, the man known throughout Iran as the Butcher of Tehran. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, got up and praised Raisi as a great man and a great leader for his people. Now, when he died, there were a lot of people in Iran setting off fireworks. Nobody was mourning his passing. But the UN, and by the way, I don't know that I've followed the UN for a long time. I don't know that they've ever done this for another world leader. For example, if let's say Benjamin Netanyahu passes away, how many of you think that the UN will do a 90-minute long tribute to Benjamin Netanyahu? I don't see any hands. Because it's not going to happen. And so I'm not aware of this happening at this level and this length of time for anybody else. Especially the guy who was just so evil. Now, we had some interesting developments in Gaza this week. Early in the week, in fact, this is Friday's Israel Hayom, Israel Today newspaper, front page, and it's talking about what's going on in Gaza and some of the successes that Israel's had in Gaza. There's a big article in there about how Israel now control the entire Philadelphia corridor, which is the southern border of Gaza that's the border between Gaza and Egypt, where they've discovered 40, 50 significant underground tunnels. I played you a video of that last week about how they're constructed. And the Egyptians have been livid that Israel's taking control of this area. It now comes out, I think I heard Caroline Glick talking about it the other day, maybe with somebody else, but I think it was her, that the son of al-Sisi, so everybody says, well, Israel's got a peace agreement with Egypt, so everything is just perfect with Egypt and Israel. Egypt's our friend, it's our partner. But now they're finding out that al-Sisi's son, is involved with the tribes that have been given control of the border crossing, Bedouin tribes in the Negev, and he's getting his cut off of the materials that are smuggled across the border. Building materials, rocket-making materials, that sort of thing. So he has a financial interest in it. And now they see that might be coming to an end, and they're all upset about it because they're making money off it. By the way, there was also a good analysis done on the materials that have gotten across the border and aid and that type of thing. And it's estimated what happens when the aid gets in there. Hamas comes in and steals it. And then they turn around and sell it at an inflated price to their own people. And the estimates are that Hamas has made $500 million since October 7th doing this, $500 million profit. It's not a bad business, especially when you're at war and living in a tunnel underground like a rat. But there were a couple of Israeli soldiers killed in one of these operations. And then yesterday was this great story that came around that Israel had gone into Rafah, into the central part of Gaza, and rescued 4 hostages. It was an amazing operation, very high risk. And I would say this and I love Israel, so you could say I'm biased, but I think it's pretty hard not to say that Israel does these better than anybody else on the planet. You remember the raid on Entebbe, led by the field commander, and that was Benjamin Netanyahu's older brother, Yoni, who was the only one killed in the whole operation. They flew all the way to Entebbe in Uganda, rescued a bunch of hostages and brought them home, and only one soldier was killed. And it stunned the world. By the way, that was on July 4th, 1976, which was kind of a big day here in the United States. So we were sort of focused on some other things, but nobody could believe that they did this. It was a stunning operation. So they go into the central part of Gaza, near this refugee camp. This is where they found the hostages were being held. There were some other hostages in that area that were friendly fire killed them a couple weeks ago in the same area. So this is sort of it's hard to understand the difficult terrain, difficult logistics that Israel has when they're fighting in Gaza. You have alleys, you have tunnels underneath, you have high, multi-story apartment buildings, and every opening that you see is a potential place where a sniper can shoot at you. And when I was in Israel in December 2022, they took us to the Urban Warfare Training Center, and it's much more benign than this, but it does have multi-story buildings and windows and, fake mosque and that sort of thing, and tunnels. This is incredibly difficult military fighting. So they were holding the hostages there. There were these, they did some airstrikes to kind of get everybody's attention away. They then sent in helicopters. The young lady, her name is Noah, they were all kidnapped from that music festival that was taking place. And there's sort of the iconic picture of her on the back of a pickup truck, like trying to figure out what's happening. And then these other three guys, and she was being held in a separate apartment home of a Palestinian, not a Hamas person, a Palestinian family in Gaza, 200 yards away from the other guys. By the way, the people who were holding her was a father and son. The son is a reporter for Al Jazeera. So when Israel shut down Al Jazeera, everybody goes, oh, they're against freedom of the press. No, we're against a terrorist sponsoring organization. So Al Jazeera is funded by Qatar government. It's Muslim Brotherhood. It's extremely biased in what it says. And you can watch it. You can read what it says. I mean, I look at it. They bury the lead a lot. The truth is buried in their articles. But so the son worked for Al Jazeera, and the father was a physician. Now, my understanding is they were killed in the raid. So Israel sent a couple teams in. It was a pretty amazing operation. This is a graphic from, I think, the Wall Street Journal website today. They brought people in. They were disguised. They got in there. They started attacking. And then as they were trying to get people out, they had two vehicles that broke down, had a mechanical failure, and they had to kind of adjust on the fly. But Israel practiced this maneuvers for weeks. They've known where these people were for a couple of months, but they had to figure out, and that's where Israel, I think, does excel, is that forget about all the failures that happened on October 7th. When they're under the gun and they have to learn how to adapt and train for very difficult logistically difficult operation, they're able to do that. Now, one soldier was killed in that. So you see his little picture here. So this is kind of a timeline from Israel Hayom as I was reading it this morning. And by the way, I usually read in pretty detail the Jerusalem Post and a lot of the articles there. I didn't even have time to look at it this week, just because there was so much going on. So Israel goes in there, they get these hostages, they're able to free them, and then the way the story is that the diamonds, I forget, something about the diamonds. They called the hostages the diamonds. We have the diamonds in our possession, and they were able to free them. And so here's one of the helicopters and one of the hostages there in the center. And it was an amazing operation. It's another one of these ones that Israel does these things with some regularity and success. And they do it better than anybody else. And I think there's a reason for that. So here's Prime Minister Netanyahu made a brief statement after the operation.
Israel just carried out a remarkable rescue operation of 4 hostages held by Hamas. This operation required ingenuity and courage of the highest degree, and our soldiers performed in an unmatchable way. We're committed to getting the release of all the hostages, and we expect Hamas to release them all. But if they don't, we'll do whatever it takes to get them all back home. Hamas is committing war crimes every day, including the holding of these hostages. Our soldiers are performing in the most valiant and moral way to end this war with a victory against these killers and against these kidnappers, and we shall prevail.
And then here was the statement of the Israeli Defense Forces spokesperson.
This morning at 11 a.m., Israeli Special Forces conducted complex hostage rescue mission and successfully rescued 4 of our hostages from Hamas captivity in Gaza. Noar Gamani, Almog Meir Jan, Shlomi Ziv, and Andrei Kozlov. They are back home in Israel. They are alive. They are well. They will undergo medical examination and will soon be reunited with their families in the hospital. Noah, Almog, Andrei, and Shlomi were rescued after 246 days in Hamas captivity after they were brutally kidnapped from the Nova Musical Festival on the 7th of October. This was a high-risk complex mission based on precise intelligence conducted in daylight in 2 separate buildings deep inside Gaza. While under fire inside the buildings, under fire on the way out from Gaza, our forces rescued our hostages. Israeli forces have been preparing for this rescue mission for weeks. They underwent intensive training. They risked their lives to save the lives of our hostages. This is what we do in Israel. We risk our lives to save the lives of our hostages. While we are happy that our 4 hostages are home, we will not lose sight that 120 hostages are still being held by Hamas in Gaza. Men, women, children. When we say that we will do everything to bring our hostages back home, we mean it. We will not stop fighting for their freedom. Any other decent country in the world would do the same.
So here's Israel Hayom this morning on the left. That's Noah. She's the young lady that was kidnapped. And then New York Post. I mean, it's headlines everywhere, all over the world. but not all positive, which is kind of surprising. It shouldn't be. It's not surprising, but it should be surprising, but it's not, unfortunately. So you remember the picture of her on the back of I don't know if it was a motorcycle or pickup truck or whatever, as she was being kidnapped. And they appear to be in pretty good condition. And of course, all the pro-Hamas people go, see how nice we treat our prisoners. And then they'll put up a picture of a Palestinian guy in prison in Israel who's been engaged in a hunger strike for 3 months, who looks skinny and drawn and in very bad shape. And see how Israel takes care of them? Well, the guy that's like voluntary. But nobody wants to talk about that. Interesting story about her. She was able to go see her mother. Her mother's in the hospital, dying of some terminal disease that hasn't been disclosed as far as I know, and is not expected to live too long. And her dream was she wanted to see her daughter before she passed away. And so that was able to happen yesterday. Here is the soldier in this unit that does this in Israel. These are highly trained people. They come from special forces, and usually they're in their 30s and 40s. So this guy, I mean, I saw some pictures of him from back in operations that he had done back in 2007. So he's been around for a long time, but unfortunately he was killed in the operation today. But the reaction of the Arab and Muslim press has been much, much different. So 4 hostages are saved. And look, people died on the other side in the operation. You know, terrorists died. They had them living in a home in an apartment building. Now, how many people would have known about that, given what's going on and people coming and going there? And nobody pointed it out. So here is the Arab news. This is from Saudi Arabia. Israel kills 210 in Gaza. President Abbas calls for an emergency UN Security Council session on the Nuseirat, that's the refugee camp, carnage. Oh yeah, 4 hostages rescued, special forces officer slain, 4 soldiers die in IED blast. And so that's Saudi Arabia press, where Saudi Arabia is in the process, it appears, to trying to reinvigorate the normalization process with Israel. But the press is going to do what the press is going to do. But what do they focus on? 210 dead. I'll confess to you, I'm happy the 4 hostages are home. I don't care about the others. They made their own decisions. Now, that's probably not very kind and loving of me, but fine. That's just the way I view it. Here's the Tehran Times. Here's what they say. They're looking at that resolution that the UN put in, and they're saying Israel's just like ISIS. And look, the UN, they have a memorial service for our dead president, the wonderful Muslim leader, Ibrahim Raisi, the butcher of Tehran. And these numbers, I don't know. I don't trust the numbers yet. Iran also issued, this is from in the Times, there was a big meeting this week in Istanbul. It was representatives from Iran, Pakistan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Bangladesh, Egypt, and Nigeria, all Muslim or heavily Muslim countries. It was called the D8 Summit, and so Iran said all these nations should sever ties with Israel. Turkey's already withdrawn a lot of its business with Israel. This is a Times of India report. I'm just going to play, I may have to turn down the sound, of sort of the reaction to this, sort of a summary of the reactions around the world to what happened in Gaza yesterday. And shocking crimes as a result of inaction of governments and responsible international bodies. War crimes. Not to say that they were holding them, but the rationale is, well, this young lady may have been in the IDF. So she was a soldier, therefore she's a prisoner of war, and it violates international law for her to try to escape. It's just some of the most ridiculous things. And they're going to, I don't know that they'll do anything to the other hostages because they want them to be able to use them in negotiations and that type of thing. And of the 120 that they still have, most estimates are 40 or 41 of them are already dead. So they want to get the bodies back. And they'll preserve the bodies so they can give the bodies back to make their point. And when they did find those bodies last week, the gal who had been stripped naked and put on the back of the pickup truck, they said, well, her body was miraculously preserved, which means Israel killed her on October 7th, and then they planted the body later to use it as propaganda. I'm telling you, it's unbelievable. So this is sort of some of the reactions, and I'll spare you, Joe Biden. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the North and a couple other things, and then we'll be done. But the other day, there's a publishing company called The Hill. You've probably seen it. They publish a paper. They have a YouTube channel. And they had a commentator. Her name was Brianna Joy Gay, commonly referred to as Brie Hamas because of her orientation. So the other day, they had on the sister of an Israeli hostage. So I'm going to play a few minutes of this. And I want you to watch this person that works for The Hill as this hostage's sister talks and her reaction to it, and in particular, her reaction at the end. So here's that video clip.
From released hostages about abusing they were having, whether it was mentally, physically, or sexually, and that's just terrifying. My sister is a young, amazing woman, and she just loved her life,
about her
and
sister.
she loved working with autistic children, and she loves dancing. She just went to a music festival, to celebrate.
Good. Can I ask you what you've heard from the Israeli government with respect to hostage negotiations?
Happening inside our own country. Yeah. And if the world won't help us, we will see 9/11 the second time in the U.S. as well. But we can already see in the United States, in Michigan, rallies that's calling death to America, not condemning terror organizations in Israel or any other place, in fact, is reflecting to your country as well.
I'm just going to push back against the implication that in Michigan, which has the largest Muslim and Arab population in America, that there is any threat of terrorism from our own people. And I would like to clarify also that one of the rationale that was presented for 9/11 was discussed with America's support of Israel's continued occupation of Palestine. So that's neither here nor there. I really do hope that Netanyahu agrees and Israel agrees to the ceasefire deal that could bring all the hostages, including your sister, home. And I'm sure many people watching are praying for her safety.
Thank you. Me too. And I really hope that you specifically will believe women when they say that they got hurt.
All right. Thanks for joining. Stick around. More Rising coming up next.
She got fired. It's okay to say amen to that. And of course, she's like, yeah, see, I'm pro-Israel, so I got fired because I'm pro-Israel. You got fired because you're a lousy, stinking human being. That you would be talking to a lady whose sister has been imprisoned by these terrorists for 8 months, and all you want to do is make your political points about why Netanyahu should agree to this deal. And then when she brings up the sexual abuse, what's she do? She rolls her eyes. Yeah, right. Yeah, whatever. So she's gone, and she'll probably get a bigger contract from somebody else these days. So let's talk about this. So there's a article, and later today I'll add some links down in the show description to some articles. So this is what's going on the northern border of Israel. You can see Beirut on the peninsula up there. Sidon is down here on the peninsula near the Israeli border. And you see the crosshatches. And those have essentially represent areas that Israeli citizens have left, pretty much 100%. And I see different numbers. I hear 40,000, 60, 80, 120,000. Suffice it to say that the whole north of Israel up there along the border has been pretty much evacuated. Kiryat Shimona, a city of 25,000, looks like a lot of towns around here that are 25,000. Nahariya on the coast, which is about 25,000, is still largely occupied, although there have been some missiles, rockets, mortars hitting in Nahariya recently. And the goal of Iran and Hezbollah has been to get people to leave. So back in 2006, there was the Second Lebanon War. Israel pushed north to the Litani River, and then they withdrew. Now, to Hezbollah, that's a major victory because Israel was coming after us. They stopped and they withdrew. And now, even though there's a UN resolution to say Hezbollah can't do anything there, every other home, at least in southern Lebanon, is tied to Hezbollah in some fashion. And tied to Hezbollah means it's tied to Iran. Whether it's logistical support, it's a place where there's rocket launcher, tunnel entrance, whatever. And they say the tunnels go all the way to Beirut. That's like over 40 miles. It's much, much worse than Gaza. Hezbollah is much better armed than Hamas. Hezbollah is much better trained than Hamas. Hezbollah has experience in fighting out in the open in war areas that Hamas does not have. So in Israel Hayom, there's an article that says it's with a guy named Haim Tumar. He's a former director of the Mossad. And he said, entering into a broad campaign in Lebanon right now after 8 months of fighting in Gaza significantly risks Israel's ability to function as a state with an economy, society, and international presence. So this is a guy who's in the Mossad. He is assistant director or consultant or something with the Institute on Counterterrorism. It's a good organization, but they have a lot of people who are politically liberal. And liberal in Israeli politics is not the same as liberal in U.S. politics. There's a lady, I've played her name. I think her name is Miri Eisen. She's the director of the Institute on Counterterrorism. I think it's at Reichman University. And she's very smart. I mean, she did a great video. I played a clip of it where she talked about, if this war with Hezbollah breaks loose, we're going to lose 500 people a day for over a week. So about half of what they lost on October 7th will happen every day for a week. Now, maybe because they've evacuated, it won't be as bad as the estimates are, but they did a war game on it recently. So this, and by the way, she's very bright. She's very smart. She's a retired IDF colonel and spokesperson for the IDF, but she believes firmly in a two-state solution. I think if you pressed her on that subject, she would not have any answer for you as to why it would work. But it's so embedded in people and leadership in the IDF and governments all over the world that this is the only way that this can be solved, that I think it's what they're going to try to do. So Tomar said that Hezbollah could paralyze the entire country by launching thousands of missiles. The Lebanese resistance movement poses an unprecedented threat that the Israeli army cannot counter, the former official said. They have precision missiles that can destroy Israel's gas fields in seconds. Israel cannot counter both Hamas and Hezbollah, especially with Hezbollah's large number of drones and advanced detection systems. He warned against underestimating Hezbollah's capabilities, saying that their tactical intelligence is at least as good as Israel's, and according to the Israeli official, Tel Aviv is at a historical crossroads. So it's not a very positive article. That's in Israel Hayom newspaper. You can find it on their website in English. Again, if I give you a link and it takes you to a Hebrew website, just copy the URL address and go to Chrome browser and paste it in, and it will automatically translate it for you to English. That's how you can read a lot of these newspapers. So he said, listen, Hezbollah can destroy our gas fields. And this is a graphic I made up a while showing the Israeli gas fields, the lower ones in red. There was a dispute over the ones that straddled the line. Amos Hochstein went in, our energy guy in the Middle East, works at the State Department, and essentially got Israel and Yair Lapid to give up most of the gas fields that straddled that line. And Yair Lapid was on. There's a very funny video out there. It's sort of like a Saturday Night Live show doing a parody of him. Oh, but we're talking about the border over here now. That's very, very far away. Okay? That's all I gave up. I gave up something very, very far away that has nothing to do with anything else. Oh, wait a minute. When you signed that agreement, Yair Lapid, Hezbollah thought they had a massive victory. Are you able to put that into your little brain and process it? When you do this, everything is a victory unless it's a total defeat. Remember when Joshua went into the land, they were told you're going to encounter 3 different types of people. Some will welcome you, some will resist you, but they'll get it. And then the others, well, you just need to wipe them out. And what happened? They didn't wipe them out. And the areas where they were told to wipe them out and they didn't wipe them out, these are the areas where they still have trouble today, including areas of Judea, Samaria. Now, that sounds very cold and cruel. Like you're not a Christian, you're not supposed to be in favor of these things. And I understand that. The argument is usually made, well, if you take out a terrorist, you're preventing him from ever hearing the gospel. And my thinking is, if you take out a terrorist, you're preserving the lives of a lot of people that he might kill that you can share the gospel with. And so there's this whole thing on just war doctrine and that type of thing. And people in the church disagree. I get that. this week was the 60th anniversary, or 80th anniversary of the Normandy invasion. I've always had trouble processing that. My father was injured in Belgium during or around the time of the Battle of the Bulge, had a pretty severe leg injury, which was very, very common in the Battle of the Bulge, by the way. But I don't know exactly. I just know it was in Belgium during that winter time when he was injured. Got a Purple Heart for it. But he never, ever talked about it. By the way, this week, somebody who was in our church in Johnstown, and her father was probably the closest male friend that my dad had in that church, who was also a World War II vet. She was talking, her husband told her that I was talking with my father-in-law years ago, and he said that John's dad, my dad, was in the Normandy invasion. I never, ever knew that. And the only thing I remember is Mom said, don't ask, because he won't talk about it, and he saw things that he never wants to talk about again. So he may have very well been involved in the Normandy invasion. And you're thinking there's all these, he was a ministerial undergraduate at Bob Jones University, and he ends up being in these situations. So war is horrible and everything. And so what we're seeing is we're seeing this potential thing now coming into Israel. Here's from Haaretz the other day. Israel Hezbollah playing chicken on the edge of the cliff. And you have this guy, former Mossad, used to be, we can't fight these people. We're not going to win. They're too good. Now, it's good that he's not in that organization anymore, but he belongs and works for a think tank that advises the organization. And so here's a road sign by Kiryat Shimona. May have been one that Pam and I saw when we drove by up there one day. And it's been damaged in a fire. Hezbollah is what they're doing is they're shooting rockets now into these open areas, dry brush, and they're having these massive fires. Kiryat Shimona, other cities, towns up there, villages, almost all the homes have been hit by mortars or rockets. Now, the people are gone, so there's no injuries, but there's nothing for them to come back to. So here's a graphic from the Institute for National Security Studies. They have a lot of centrist people that don't always get it, but they have pretty good graphics and pretty good information. And so they're talking about what they have and what they can reach. 67,500 of their projectiles could reach Haifa. 4,500 Tel Aviv and southwards. Thousands of drones, thousands of UAVs. And the concern is if they unleash a large number of them. So everybody, the whole world was watching 6 weeks ago when Iran responded. And Iran in that sent in 300 to 350 drones, missiles. And the world was like on edge. But Hezbollah, since October 7th, has launched 5,000. They have an arsenal estimated at 150. I've heard as high as 250,000. And so everybody says, well, they've shot 5,000 off, so they only have 145,000 left, but maybe they've been resupplied through Syria and Iraq and other places. And Miri Eisen, in her interview, she said they could launch 5,000 or more a day. That would overwhelm Israel's systems. So the question is, what are they going to do? How's this going to take place? So, by the way, there's a tit for tat going on. They've got a lot of fires going in northern Israel. Israel attacked southern Lebanon, and there's a lot of fires in southern Lebanon. And 120,000 people in southern Lebanon have left. So it's a big problem. Great article. There'll be a link to this. Jonathan Spire at The Spectator in the UK. Will Netanyahu declare war on Hezbollah? So listen to what he says. The war in Gaza is perceived internationally as a limited affair, pitting Israel against the Islamist Hamas organization within the confines of a narrow strip of territory on the Mediterranean coast. This view has long been reductive. A number of other fronts are active as a result of the outbreak of the war in Gaza, and one of them, Lebanon, is currently showing signs of erupting into full conflict. In November, the Yemenis, they attacked from the Houthis along the Red Sea. The Iran-allied Shia militias in Iraq began attacks on Israel and on the United States and allied forces in Iraq and Syria. Today, if one includes the West Bank, where militias are armed by smuggling routes from Syria across Jordan, engaged sporadically against the IDF, there are 5 active fronts in this war: Gaza, West Bank, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. For the most of the last 8 months, the scale and intensity of the fighting in Gaza has eclipsed the other zones of engagement. There are signs, however, and Jonathan, by the way, I know Jonathan, he's certainly up there in a very elite group of among the best analysts in the Middle East in terms of military and that sort of thing. There are signs, however, that this may now be changing, specifically the confrontation between Israel and Hezbollah, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's core proxy, in the Israel-Lebanon border area has sharply increased in scope and intensity in recent days. This escalation has probably not yet reached its peak. In the daily tactical exchanges now taking place, Israel's maintaining the upper hand. This is reflected in the casualty figures on both sides. 10 IDF soldiers and 14 Israeli civilians have been killed in the fighting against Hezbollah over the last 8 months. On the other side, Hezbollah acknowledges 330 killed alongside an unknown number of civilians. Targeted killings of senior movement cadres are taking place every few days all across Syria and Lebanon by Israel. But Jonathan notes this: Israel's tactical advantage is not impacting the larger strategic situation. And the low casualty figures on the Israeli side are partly explained by the northern border area being effectively depopulated. Currently, residents of northern border communities are unwilling to return to their homes, not only because of the current state of the conflict, but also because of the presence of Hezbollah fighters along the border, sometimes just a few meters from Israeli homes, raising the possibility of another October 7 type attack on a much larger scale. And this is what Hezbollah has planned all along. What happened on October 7th, which was mostly civilians, not Hamas, in terms of numbers, they're afraid that Hezbollah will do it on an even greater scale, coming through these tunnels across the border. It's just a fence in many places. And you'll have carnage like you would never believe. Now, the people have left, so that's less likely to occur, but it's still a problem. And so there's this constant back and forth between Israel and Hezbollah. Here's a little bit of Dan Senor's conversation with Walter Russell Mead, geopolitical expert, who I think understands it. He says, well, why would Hezbollah hold back? Why don't they just go and get it over with? And this is pretty insightful, I think.
Hezbollah is this terrific gun that Iran has that is pointed at Israel's head. But that gun, if you fire it, if those 100,000 plus missiles attack Israel, they do a certain amount of damage, and in some cases, who knows, maybe even catastrophic damage, but Israel is still there when it's done, angry and armed and ready to go. Iran has lost that weapon. It's gone. So it's more valuable to you, as a loaded gun on your table than as an empty smoking gun in your hand.
And he's right. So so you're going to see this back and forth, but at what cost? I mean, we're 8 months into this, and these border communities have been evacuated for 8 months. I did an interview with Nicole John-Sejan, a journalist in Jerusalem. This week it's up on our YouTube channel. I think it's on Rumble too. I may have uploaded it to Rumble. I don't remember. Certainly it's on YouTube. And we were talking about the war in the north and the effect that it's having across Israel. She said there's people all over Jerusalem that are staying in hotels and they don't have jobs. There are businesses that have tried to pay their employees, but there's nobody up there so the businesses are all going out of business. It's a cascading effect. It's having a huge impact on the Israeli economy. And so if you want some more information on that, let me just make a couple more comments, and I'm going to cut this off. I know I might actually finish a few minutes. Well, I shouldn't say that because I haven't finished yet. So this is a good article at INSS. Israel's dilemma in the north. Should we continue the mutual skirmishes or escalate into war? Nobody knows. And so Iran views this as a victory. There was an Iranian newspaper published back on Al-Quds Day a few months ago. I think this is late February. Storm is coming. And you see this imagery of the Dome of the Rock, the Temple Mount. This is central to the propaganda. And this has been used forever by different people. Wednesday night, I think I'll stream it live. Tom Hughes and I are going to interview a guy named Dr. Francisco Gil White, who really has an incredible perspective on the history of these conflicts. And I think we're going to talk mostly about the history of the Palestinian Authority and Fatah, because this is a big deal. People are saying, oh, let's just bring Abbas back. Abbas would be the great guy to have. He's the head of Fatah, Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, the guy who got his PhD on denying the Holocaust at Moscow University. Yeah, that's the guy you want to trust. He's 87, by the way. There was a cute little meme that went around saying, please celebrate with us Mahmoud Abbas beginning his 19th year of his 4-year term that he was elected to back in 2005. But up here at the top, you see this thing at Palestine Square in Tehran, these murals and the rockets, and they have Hebrew writing on them. Why? Because they're trying to send a message to people who speak Hebrew, which would be Israel. And the message, and by the way, in Farsi, Palestine Square is called Philistine Square. That's kind of important, I think, because it kind of gives you the nature of the conflict. It's a very old one, but these posters say, are you ready for 2 million displaced persons in the north of Israel? When they tell you that this is their goal, it would probably be a pretty good idea to, believe them. So, so I need to mention this. I don't know where this conflict with Russia is going to go. Putin and his people keep threatening use of nuclear weapons. If missiles that are given to Ukraine are used to attack sites in Russia, it could spiral out of control. There was a big article in I think in the Telegraph the other day about NATO mapping out plans to block Russian invasion. And then Putin came out and said, I'm not invading anybody. Well, anybody else. And so there's this, like, people are trying to force things into a war, which is very concerning. And so Russia's warned about fatal consequences if there are cross-border missile strikes that come. The other thing, too, that's kind of interesting in the recent development, and Walter Russell Mead in his interview with Dan Senor points this out, Russia has effectively, this is Walter Russell Mead. So listen, whether he was a Kissinger protege or not is irrelevant. He's a smart guy, may make bad choices, but he knows what he's talking about. And he said, Russia has effectively conquered Northern Africa using the Wagner Group. That's his assessment of it. Well, that does fit it when we talk in Bible prophecy of Put and Cush, Cush being Sudan. And now this week there was big announcements about Russia and Sudan having made arrangements for a Russian port on the Red Sea. I think that's kind of significant information. There's elections going on in Europe this week. A lot of people think that they never call people right, they call them far right. Far right will get more people in the European Parliament. Like, I think one of the exit polls I saw showed Geert Wilders, who's anti-Islamic in his orientation, that his party from the Netherlands has 1 seat in the European Parliament, and they'll have 7 in the next one if the election holds the way that it's going. And so everybody's upset. Giorgia Meloni from Italy and Viktor Orban from Hungary against the German and the French guy there on the left. And so these elections go through today, and we'll know how those are going to pan out. By the way, King Charles loves this picture. So he wants to hang it at the palace. Good luck. Good luck, Chuck. I'm going to mention this, and I promise I will close with this. And I'll talk more about this. By the way, in 2 weeks, I'll be speaking at Renewed Life Church in Puyallup, Washington, the Seattle area. I think at 10:30, then we'll have lunch, and then I'll do a prophecy update. I don't know if it'll be live streamed. I assume it will be. But this is Pride Month. And we live in Columbus, and this is a big deal in Columbus. I stopped subscribing to this publication a long time ago, and this morning, this is the front page of the Columbus Dispatch. Anybody else, anybody in here, you don't have to raise your hand for that. Can you believe it? It's ironic. Now, this does meet the definition ironic, that the ad on the front page of the New York, or the Columbus Dispatch this morning, in the upper right-hand corner, is for Rumpke, the waste disposal firm, the garbage bin. I think that's kind of perfect product placement, or ad placement, and everything, given what's going on. And I talked about this. The first one was held 6 years ago. This is an ad for Revoice 24. It's a LGBTQ-oriented conference. And they have all these speakers coming. Some of them would be names that you recognize. If you read their statement of faith, by the way, it seems pretty conventional. It actually talks about Jesus coming back. But the orientation of this is not biblical in my view. And so it's scheduled to take place in Columbus, June 26th to the 29th. Oh, by the way, do you want to know where it's at? It's at a church, the Vineyard, down on Cooper Road. So you see here, the theme, this year's conference is centered on Ephesians 2, We'll explore how our lives as LGBTQ plus Christians can be unique displays of the glory of God and what masterpieces we're called to make with our lives. We'll explore questions such as, what does it mean to be well made by God, and how is God calling us to live as new creations? Whether you're LGBTQ plus / SSA, I think that means same-sex attracted, or a straight friend of our community, we hope you'll join us. The display of God's workmanship won't be the same without you. That's at the Vineyard, Columbus, in a few weeks. It's founded by a guy named Nate Collins, so I went back, I dug out one of the video clips that I did from the first Revoice conference in St. Louis, Missouri. I think it was at some Reformed church, Presbyterian church. And I'll just play 27 seconds. I don't remember which clip this is, but this is the founder, Nate Collins. He was a professor at Southern Seminary, President Albert Mohler, and he left to form Revoice. So here's what he says.
Now this raises an interesting question. How are teachers like this, these false prophets, able to gain positions of power and influence in the first place? Jeremiah gives us the answer to this question as well. False prophets arise when there are bad shepherds.
He goes on to liken himself as, because we're saying this is uncomfortable to the church, I'm Jeremiah to this generation. So we'll talk more about it, but if you want to go back, I played this back in 2018, 4 clips. This is what's coming to Columbus. And do you see how they couch it? If you're against us, you're false shepherds. And because you're false shepherds, you'll have false prophets that will come and maybe criticize us. I think this is where he's going. It's been a while since I've listened to these, but I'm pretty sure I remember this. I'm going to put up a slide. I'm not going to read it because of our platform, but this is a study that was published in the Netherlands this week. And you can read the headline and you can look up that particular research publication. Now, it's being attacked by a lot of people, but it's interesting. It comes out the same week that a certain head of the CDC or whatever he headed up was testifying in front of Congress and not doing a very good job, in my opinion. So anyway, crazy things going on in the world. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Pray for Israel. Pray for the people there. Pray for wisdom. There is Caroline Glick this morning. Gantz will have a news conference at about, well, it may have already taken place, to announce that he's leaving the coalition, the unity government that was formed. Do you want me to play a clip of her on the news this morning? Okay, I'll play a clip of her. This is Caroline Glick being interviewed about Gantz leaving the government just this morning.
We're joined by Caroline Glick. She's a former senior foreign policy advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu and the senior contributing editor of the Jewish News Syndicate. She is joining us from Jerusalem this morning. Thank you for joining us, Caroline. So getting right into it, how are Israelis reacting to yesterday's special operation that was able to bring home those 4 hostages and keep Israel's war cabinet intact, at least for now?
Well, Israelis responded with jubilation to the news that our special forces were able to conduct such a daring operation that I don't think has any precedent, even including the Entebbe raid, because they had to carry out simultaneous operations in 2 apartments. And in terms of the war cabinet, it actually looks like it's going to dissolve today because Minister without portfolio, Benny Gantz, who was supposed to resign yesterday, but his announcement was overtaken by the jubilation regarding the rescue of the 4 hostages. He postponed it till tonight. So I think that that may be going through, but I'm not quite sure what political benefit he gets from it, because Netanyahu right now is flying high as a result of the operation yesterday, and his wartime leadership in general is met with approval by the majority of Israelis. So,
I know you mentioned that it does seem likely that Benny Gantz will still step down. If he does, why was yesterday's operation not enough to keep him on the cabinet?
Because I don't think that he's responding to events on the ground. I think he's responding to American pressure. I think that the administration wants to break up the wartime cabinet. That just the way that they've been behaving in recent weeks, and the fact that Blinken, Secretary of State Blinken, is arriving here tomorrow morning. So I think that it has more to do with the timing of Blinken's arrival than it does with any sort of political rationale on Gantz's part. It's going to be less important from Israel's perspective than outside actors think it will, because, Gantz didn't actually do a lot that the government benefited from for having been there. He didn't stabilize anything. He was actually a destabilizing character politically. And, we've been, as you saw, we've been subjected to calumny, to these crazy indictments for war crimes when we're fighting a genocidal foe. I mean, one of the hostages, Noah Argamani, was being kept by a family whose the father was a physician. This is the second hostage who's been held hostage by a physician. And his son was a senior journalist at Al Jazeera and a former senior official in Hamas's Bureau of Labor. So, the way that she was held, the people who were holding her captive, showed just how enmeshed Hamas is inside of the overall population of Gaza, and that it's really impossible to tell them apart.
I know you mentioned earlier that Gantz was a destabilizing factor, that people in Israel believe he didn't do much to help stabilize. So how does Gantz's exit change how Netanyahu now proceeds with the war? Does it change much at all?
Well, I mean, he had a veto for all of the war operations, and if he leaves the war cabinet, then he doesn't have that veto anymore. And he has been really working to stall a lot of the major operations that we've been doing, slow down a lot of the operations that we've been doing. I think he played an instrumental role in postponing Israel's operation in Rafah, Hamas's last major outpost, where they're now being dismantled by our forces there, but they had 4 battalions in Rafah, and all the major leaders are seen as, or perceived as, being holed up there in tunnels underneath the ground. So, we waited for 4 months to carry out this critical operation due to American pressure that was reflected in the war cabinet by Benny Gantz. So I think that it means that the government will have the ability to prosecute the war without delay.
All right, we will see what comes out of that announcement.
So, Gantz came into the cabinet, and you can read Caroline's article at JNS or her website, carolineglick.com. And it says, Gantz came in, and I'll help with the Biden administration. I'll keep them under control. And that never didn't happen. So there was no reason to continue with Gantz anyway, because he didn't do anything that he said he was going to do. Without his 8 people in the Knesset, Benjamin Netanyahu still has 64 out of 120. So that means his coalition is still holding together. Now, it could fall apart, and there could be elections in the next few months. I mean, when I said at the beginning, my title was, "The world is moving in many directions," I mean it. There are a lot of things happening. A lot of things seem contradictory. I just think it's a chaotic world. And I think this is the world that we live in until the Lord returns. That's my opinion. So let's pray and let's get out of here. Lord, thanks so much for your word. Lord, pray that you will give us opportunities to share the gospel with people around us, because this truly is, the gospel truly is their only hope in the world that we live in the world to come, to be prepared for that. So pray that you'll bless us this week. Give us those opportunities. In Jesus' name, amen.